morning is for that, every evening, every afternoon. But today we've dedicated to doing that together, corporately with our family. And we're grateful that you give us this privilege. So many people don't have it. And we want to think outside of our box. We want to know you. And there's so many different understandings of you. And we want truth. And that's a never-ending experiment as we try to understand you, inexhaustible you, and us and our such limited, finite understanding. But help us today through your Spirit to know a little bit more, to understand your Bible a little bit better. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, let's do a quick review of all the cool things that we've been talking about. Number one, the title of this book. Actually, I don't know if this is a review. I don't know if I ever actually told you what the title of this book is. You know what the title is, right? Genesis, yes, but what's the real title of it? That's right. Yes, Bereshit, right? So, so that's in the beginning. Just like every book of the Old Testament is the first few words of the book. So the book of Numbers is Bamidbar, in the wilderness, right? So that's just a little extra piece so you can sound smart at parties when people ask you, okay? So number two, we talked about authorship. Most people call it Moses. Okay, when I say most people, I mean most like church people who grew up in church, with some kind of church education. They think of this as Moses, because Jesus even talks about the books of Moses, things like that. But most scholars would say Moses probably didn't have as much to do with it as we think, and that it was much later. And one of the things that I'm trying to argue in here is that it's so late that it might actually be written or at least edited during the exile. Okay, that doesn't mean Moses had nothing to do with it. So we kind of call this fundamental Mosaic authorship, like maybe the beginning ideas started to be taken and started to be put together early on. But as you see it today in its final form, the form that we have today, it's probably edited or mostly, even largely written during the exile. Okay, so that's just two things. And I'm going to make that point throughout the whole 9 weeks. That's what I'm trying to get to. Let's see here. Situational context. I'm not going to write every single thing down. Situational context. We talked about making sure that we understand this in the exile is very important. It's like reading Animal Farm and not realizing it's about Stalin. It's a cool story about dogs and pigs and a farm, but it's not nearly as cool if you don't know that it's about something that happens in history, in Russia, right? All that stuff that's happening. So this is really important to know that the stuff that you're reading about, Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, Babylon, the Tower of Babel, are all referencing something that happened hundreds of years later. That's how the story is going to be talking about it. We did talk about creation myths. We need to re-talk about this. So 3, we just skipped over, but 4, I mean, I just told you what it was. I'm just not going to write it. Myths. When you hear the word myth, the thing that probably pops into your mind most of all, am I following this thing? Is it following me anymore? Nope. Do I have to do this again every 3 minutes? Just stay within, okay. That's the whole, okay. So a myth is not what you think it is when you're like myths are pretend stories, right? Fairy tales, fictions, okay? In scholarly literature, in biblical literature, we don't talk about myths that way. They don't mean fictive narratives. They mean narratives that are larger than themselves, okay? They really mean stories about gods. Okay, so real simple, almost every story in the Bible is a myth in that sense. But you don't like that, right? Because it just grates on you. Like, well, they're pretend. They're not pretend. They're stories about something more. So they could be actual, literal, 100% accurate stories, but they're told in such a way that they're pointing to something bigger than themselves. Okay, so we call this, sometimes we call this archetypal. Okay, so it's an archetype. You'll hear me do this a lot in books like the book of Ruth. Ruth is a story that I think actually literally took place, most of it, but it's actually a story, an archetype about the microcosm of something bigger, about what happens in Israel's life. Okay, and I think that's what's happening in Genesis 1 through 11 too. And there are several of these myths, like Enuma Elish or Atrahasis. I know you can't read this or understand what I'm saying if you've never heard of these before. Enuma Elish is a story I think I told you about Tiamat and Marduk, Marduk being the good god of Babylon, and Tiamat being this dragon god. And apparently, I think it's his grandmother or grand aunt, depending on what story. And they didn't have counseling at that time, so they couldn't go to family counseling. So they got in this big battle, and Marduk beats up Tiamat and rips her in half, fillets her, puts half of the body, this dragon body, up in the heavens and half on earth, and humankind will live down here and the gods will live up here. That's it's a creation myth, right? One that I don't think is actually literally true, okay? But it could be, I guess. I mean, just because I use the word myth doesn't mean it's not true. In this case, I don't think it's true, but you hear what I'm saying, right? So there are myths like that. Atrahasis is another one of those kinds of myths. There's so many different ones. Atrahasis is about the gods and how they want to create the world, and they just come up with this idea, and it's all just they just kind of make it up as they go, right? It's very unintentional. It's like, well, the people are making lots of noise. Let's get rid of the people because they're annoying the heck out of us. Things like that. Okay, and so they send this giant deluge. You've heard a story something like that, except for God has this different reason for doing it. Because remember, that's the whole point, is that this text is there to battle other texts. So they have ideas in their head, right, as to how and why things happen. And these texts come in to say, no, your ideas, the reason that these happen aren't quite right. Let me explain to you how the Yahweh myth works. Again, not pretend, how the Yahweh story works. Just like there's all kinds of words that we use in biblical literature. If I use the word cult, okay, which we're going to talk about in here, probably even today, okay, the cult just means the place where you do worship. Okay, it has to do with your worship things. It doesn't mean Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or whatever else you think is a cult. That's not what we're talking about. It's the worship practices, the rituals that go on. Okay, so you got to learn the language as you're reading these books, and you're just like, what? I can't believe they use the word myth. I'm done with this. No, that means you're reading a book that's scholarly. Okay, go ahead and give them a chance to talk through these things so you can understand these things. Okay, so creation myths, Enuma Elish, Atrahasis. Organization, I talked about 5 different books, right? So actually I talked about Tanakh, okay, Torah, Nevu'im, and Ketuvim, which are the different, what you have is 37 different books of the Old Testament. They're organized into these. And then Torah is separated into 5 different books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, you know all those things. This is the intro to Torah and the intro to the entire thing. And you might even argue for the intro to the whole canon, right, including the New Testament. Because the New Testament is going to jump back and make tons of allusions to Genesis 1 through 3 especially, but really to Genesis 1 through 11. Okay, Revelation is going to hit hard in chapter 21 and 22. Some of you were attending my Revelation class. Oh my goodness, they're going to talk about these garden themes over and over and over again. If you're not picking up on the garden themes in Revelation 21, you're missing the whole point. It's that we're returning to not quite a garden, but garden ideas, but something bigger than a garden, a city. It's gonna be awesome in Revelation. Okay, anyway, so what this is not a science book. You're not supposed to read it as scientific. It's not a history book. You're not supposed to read it as history. Is it gonna have science? Absolutely. Is it gonna have history? Absolutely. Is it gonna have ethics? Absolutely. But it's not designed primarily to do those things. It's leading you, it's taking you somewhere. It's giving you a narrative about a group of people in a traumatic situation and why these things have been done to them. And it's pushing us to something else. And something that happens after the exile, something that will return them, get them out of exile. That's the great hope. So the New Testament's going to come along and it's going to say, oh, you wanted to get out of exile? Let me tell you about the new Moses. Let me tell you about the new Noah. Let me tell you about the new Abraham, the one who's going to deliver you in a new way as he comes up over the hill, right? And bluebirds are singing and the sun is shining in the air. And you look out and you see those sandals and you see John say, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away, right? And there's just this power, because the New Testament is the culmination of everything that they've been waiting for, the story that's coming. All is going to culminate in Jesus. Okay, so it's not an ethics book. It's none of those things. What it is a piece of literature, right? It is not more than that. The Bible is not what we should be worshiping, right? The Bible is a piece of literature, lots of pieces of literature put together in order to point you to that to which we should be worshiping. And when I say that, you know what I mean. Him who we should be worshiping. So the Bible is not important, except for that it points us to the most important thing, right? Which makes it really, really important. Okay, but not important like you think it is. Like it's like, no, right? It's this thing that points, just like the stars and the moon and the sun, and you guys point, it does, but it does it differently. We call it special revelation because it points to Jesus in a way that we couldn't have known through all the other things. Okay, so it's a piece of literature or a group of pieces of literature. And I showed you last week how it's set into, even this Genesis has this framework that's showing you that it's a piece of literature, right? Day 1 is connected to day 4. Day 2 is connected to day 5. Day 3 is connected to day 6. If you missed this last week, you want to go back and get the video because it's very important, right? That light and sun, moon, stars, etc., right? That they're connected, right? That the water separating and the sky and the sea, right? So water separated like this and putting birds and swimming things, flying things and swimming things in that. Okay, and then we got the waters again, but separating them this way, right? So it's light, it's separation, and it's separation. And then it's putting things in each of these places. Okay, so this is man and animals. Okay, so we call this the framework theory or hypothesis, or just it's a literary move. This doesn't answer any of the questions that you have about evolution, about whether it was actually created in 6 days, because it's not designed to do that. So if you have questions about that, ask somebody who's asking science questions. Moses / whoever's writing this later isn't asking those questions. You got people right here in this room that know more about that than Moses will ever know. Well, maybe not they'll ever know, but knew when he was writing it. He might know a lot more now. I have no idea what he knows now. Right? Jesus may have downloaded every bit of information into his head. I don't know how that all works. Okay. And we talked about a bunch of different ways to understand this. An analogical was one of the ways I suggested. Analogical just means that it's like a work day when you're creating the world. Okay, okay, so God went to work. He got up in the morning. He went to work. He did his work. He came home. Evening, morning, first day. Okay, get up, go to work. Right. So it's not saying that it's 24 hours. It's not saying it's not 24 hours. Does the word yom mean 24 hours? Absolutely, it does. Okay, do not take these ideas that it actually means something else, and like the day of the dinosaur, right? That it's not used that way. It's always used literally, I think, in every case that I'm aware of. But that doesn't mean that it's trying to tell you that it's a 24-hour day. It's just using the word day that you would know. Just like if I use the word day right now, you would go 24 hours. But I might still be telling you a bigger story about something else, right? That it could be thousands of years for each one. That might not even be the point. The point might be just to organize it into work days. Okay, so we're not really answering the question of how long the world took. That's not the point. That's not what any of the authors are trying to figure out. So the fact that I promised you that you have an answer as to how old the Earth is in those Wednesday announcement things, I'm not going to give it to you. I have no idea. Okay, my view is always to go with the consensus view until there's a new consensus view. I've had no problem changing my mind in 10 years. If you come to me in 10 years, you say, you taught us this, now you think this. I'm like, yep. I learned more, people learned more. I didn't know that before, now I know this. May I change again? Yep. I certainly believed something different when I was 12 than I believe now. I hope all of you do. Okay, like little elves that come down chimneys, right? Things like that. I'm sure I probably shouldn't go any further for some of you. I don't want to mess up any of your myths. Okay. All right. So that's the reminders of what we've done, and we've been talking big time about this idea, creation wars. Right? That God, the whole point of this is this literature, which is a polemic. Polemic is like when we say an apologetic, an apology doesn't mean I'm sorry. I mean, it also means that. But an apology, when you're talking in this world, apologetics is a defense of something. So you're defending something. This is kind of an aggressive defense. It's kind of I'm not waiting for you to attack and then I'm defending myself. I'm kind of going on I'm going to attack. Right? So there's a whole bunch of different pieces of literature out there. And so this literature is meant to say, hey, you think this is what the creation of the world looks like? You think this is what it looks like? Oh, let me show you what it looks like. And then I'm making a twist. It's like, I'm going to throw in the creation of the world literature that you knew, right? Because there's a whole bunch of manuscripts out there of different creation of the world. And so Moses or someone later is going to grab all of these ideas. He's going to put all of them together, right? He's going to connect them together. And then he's going to add in a whole lot of other things, right? In the seams here and here to change the story enough that you're going to see something else going on. Okay, he's going to first of all introduce that there's only one God, not lots of gods, or he's going to kind of say that, right? But he's going to say one God certainly is supposed to be worshipped above all else. So this is the creation wars. They want you to worship Baal, right? Or Leviathan, or Yam, or you name it, Rahav, Chemosh, Molech. Some of these you've heard of before. They want you to worship them. There's what he's saying is we want you to worship Yahweh and Yahweh alone. And that's the problem. Remember, that's the problem during the exile when they start asking that question. Why are we here? I'll tell you why we're here. Because we didn't do that. That's why we're here. And Yahweh said, enough. Tired of this. You're out. You didn't listen to me. You thought you could figure it out on your own. You thought you had enough wisdom. You thought you could make all the choices when I told you you're not old enough to make those choices yet. Right? Israel, you haven't gotten there. Trust me right now. When you get there, I'll let you make those choices, but you're not there yet. Some of you have told your children that before, right? You're a 3-year-old. I'm sorry, I don't even know how to explain this to you yet. You're just going to have to trust me, or I'm dad. That's why. Right? Because you don't have the capacity. I hope that's the reason you did it, right? To understand all of that. Otherwise, I think you should be explaining it to them. Okay, that's a parenting advice, but anyway, most of you, probably your kids are mostly raised, so it doesn't matter. Okay, you don't need my help. You've probably done a way better job than I have. All right, so here's where we come into this creation wars. And you remember, I started this whole thing off with telling you that the best story in the world was the one that's told about darkness and light. Dun, dun, dun. You guys know that one? Dun, 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 right? Star Wars. And so we talked about all that, but I want to talk about choices over the next 2, maybe even 3 weeks. I'm going to talk about choices. So the stuff you have in your hand is about choices. And I don't know where we're going to go. We're going to go all over the place. And I'm going to keep coming back to this paper in some way, because this is what will center me, focus me, and not have me going, I have so many things I want to tell you, and I got to focus this. Okay. But choices is the idea. So I started thinking, okay, what choices did they make in the greatest movie ever? Star Wars. Well, Indiana Jones, maybe. But they've botched all of the end ones, right? So all the Star Wars for the last 6 ones have been terrible compared to the first 3. The Indiana Jones, anybody see it this weekend? It's Indiana Jones. Come on. This is the best news ever. It just came. Okay, anyway. I won't even talk about it then. All right. So what decisions did they make in Star Wars? And you know what? I'm just going to skip that whole section because I'm looking at you guys and you don't care about Star Wars. You can't remember it and you don't want to talk about it. I'm just seeing this. So I'm just going to skip 1-2 pages of awesome connections to Jesus and whatever. Just going to let it go and start going right onto your paper right there. This is such a disappointment to me, but all right. I could see it in your eyes. Dear God, please don't let him go into Star Wars. So what is the purpose of Genesis 1 is the question that we're asking. Then we're going to shift and ask, what is the question of Genesis 2? What is the purpose of Genesis 2? The purpose of Genesis 1 said lots of times, not evolution, not science, not trying to give you days of the month, not any of those things. It's only trying to say Yahweh is God over all the other gods that he creates. Not only on his, like, and he does this creation event on his own with minimal effort. Okay, where all the other stories out there are gods coming together usually to do this. Sometimes gods do it on their own, but it takes effort. There are things they have to do. Usually in this first Genesis 1, he just goes, let there be light. Right? And he separated the light from the darkness. Right? Okay, he separates the waters from the water, separates the water. You don't get the impression that this is like a major work day for him. Like he's sweating a lot, figuring out this, okay, I don't know, geez, right? What we think of these work days, it's gonna be work, but he's doing this with little things. So what's the purpose of Genesis 2? Because that's where we're shifting. We're gonna keep going back to Genesis 1. fact, already, I've got to go back to Genesis 1 because I forgot a major thing that I never told you, right? Which I think you know very well. So 1, 5, 4, you get the idea here. But there's also this piece, right? 7, rest. On this day, he rested. Okay, this is where you get the idea of the Sabbath. Now, this church I've heard talks a lot about the Sabbath. In fact, last January, right? Yes, we did a whole thing about what rest and vocation look like, what vocation looks like compared to rest. And we talked about, I've done like 3 sermons on it. So I decided I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about what this rest looks like, just to remind you that God rests for different reasons, depending on what text you're looking at. So if you're looking at Genesis versus looking at Exodus, Deuteronomy, you're going to see that God rests. I told you this on the first week, but some of you aren't here and some of you have already forgotten. God rests first because he creates the world in 6 days, and so he rests. And second, he rests because he rescues Israel from Egypt. Okay, and that's why we rest. That's the way I should say it. The reason that we rest is connected to those 2 things. That is creation and redemption. And I said in review, right, that this cycle is going to continue throughout the entire Bible. It's going to recapitulate itself. Okay, there's going to be a progressively parallel structure where God is going to create something, and then it's going to go uncreate, and then he's going to bring it back. And every time we bring it back, this is what we mean by redeem, or recreate, or bring something up from life. Yeah. After creation and redemption, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to. I actually haven't thought of that. There are definitely, God's definitely do rest. That's a normal thing. In fact, they have to rest because they get really exhausted sometimes. So you can even remember, although I'm not positive, but a lot of scholars say this, in the Elijah myth, I'll go and use it like that just to mess with people. In the Elijah myth on the mountains, right? Carmel, on Carmel. Some of you have been there, you've seen Carmel, and Baal is being worshipped and the fire comes down out of heaven. Remember all that stuff? And Elijah teases the prophets of Baal. And one of those is, oh, your God must be sleeping. He must be resting, right? Some people say, no, it means he's in the bathroom, he's relieving himself. Some might say it's supposed to be satirical, comical, but that's exactly right. Yeah. And in fact, the Psalms actually go on the other direction, right? Your God does not slumber, he does not sleep, right? But different authors will talk about it in different ways. This is a different kind of rest. You're absolutely right. This is where he says, not like rest, I'm tired for my work week, but rest where I'm done. I finished the work, right? There's something new now. By the way, that's why we live in some sense, Hebrews will tell us, we live in rest, but not really, right? Like there's already a rest for us, but not yet. We rest from our labors, from our works. We don't have to prove anything, right? God loves you no matter what. It's a beautiful concept that we need to take from rest, right? Rest from your labors. None of you has to prove anything. Isn't that kind of nice? You don't have to prove anything to your wife or to your husband or to your kids or certainly you don't have to prove anything to God. God says, I love you no matter what you do, right? There's nothing you can do that'll make me love you less. I said that in a sermon recently, right? That's really important. So we rest from that, but also we rest on purpose intentionally once a week to remind ourselves, well, many things of these things, but also that it's not up to us, right? Because that's what we think. If I don't do this, then I'm not going to be provided for. I've got to make sure I've provided for my children and my kids and all those things. And so we work and we work and we work till exhaustion. And God says, this has never been about you. I'm the one who provides. I'm the generous God. Here, I'm giving you all these things and you keep hoarding it. You keep stuffing it in your pockets. Remember I talked about a sermon like that, right? The most generous host, and you're stuffing it in your pockets because you're not sure that there's going to be enough for you. That's what working on Sunday is, all of you. Okay. But it's not a law, it's wisdom. Okay, it's a move forward. It's saying, God, you've got this. All right, I said I wasn't going to do that, but then I started preaching, but that's great. Thank you. I didn't answer your question, but I rambled on about other stuff. So thank you. Which is probably what will always happen. If you got good questions, I probably don't know the answers to them. but I'll tell you some other cool thing. Okay, so what is the purpose of Genesis 2? That's where we're headed. And there's so many exciting things in here. Okay, so I think the purpose of Genesis 2 is to show us that our quest for knowledge, excellence, wisdom, are accomplishing all of these things is a good thing, but it needs to be done in the right time with the right parameters around it. Okay, you're like, how is this at all about? This is the Adam and Eve story and the failure in the garden, the fall, and all that stuff. But I think it's all about these choices that we make and why we make them, why we're not trusting God enough to make the right ones for us. Okay, I'm going to try and show you all of that. So Genesis 2 is about the foolish ways we grow up. It's about making these bad choices, about ignoring our parents. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Some of you have kids who did the same thing, right? It's about wanting what's best for ourselves, but choosing to get it our own way instead of listening to him, right? And you're going to hear that cycle, right? Throughout the whole Bible, they did what was right in their own eyes, right? They saw, they took, they ate. It's that story that's going to consistently, you know, those words from Genesis, that he saw the fruit, it was good to the eyes, they took and they ate. That phraseology is going to show up throughout the Bible. You may never have noticed it before, but it's this constant theme because Genesis is all this microcosm of what's happening in the bigger world. So we're supposed to get wisdom, but we're supposed to do it the way God takes us in that direction. So we'll talk about that over the next 3 weeks. So God wants us to know what we're supposed to know. Like he wants us to know the difference between right and wrong and all those things, but he wants us to get there on his path. So this is the second creation story. Choices. So I want to ask you a question before I jump into, on your paper, it'll say Pastor Jace's story, and then it'll say Abdiel and Abrahim's story, something like that. Okay. So if you were to ask questions about Genesis 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 2, 3, 4, you know the stories, like you've heard them a million times, literally. What are the things that stick out to you if you were being honest? What are questions you would have about that? Just big picture questions, not like individual things like does comma go here? Like big picture. What bothers you about this text or excites you? Or yeah. Great. Okay. Knowledge of good and bad. Good. Okay. That's a huge question. Maybe the question. Keep going.
Why didn't they listen? Why just didn't they
Okay.
listen to God?
Not listen. Yeah. Why don't they listen? Okay.
Tree.
Just one tree. It's one tree. Yeah. You had one job, right? Don't touch the tree. Yeah. 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 Okay. Eat from life. All right. I'm going to say I think they probably did, but yep, it's a good question. Yeah. Say that. All right. Satan in the garden. Okay. I would go a whole lot more, even more with that one right there. Is it Satan? How does he talk? Right? I mean, that's a real basic question, right? This is a snake. I mean, if it's Satan, then you know how he talks, but it's a snake. So we got, yeah, I mean, how did he get in the garden? If everything is good, right? He says like so many times in the first chapter. Keep going. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the rivers. 4 rivers, yep. Or one, yeah, that goes out from throne. What? Okay, yeah, why Satan? Okay, that's a great question. Much bigger question than Genesis 2 will be able to answer, like, why is there evil? The problem of evil in general is the philosophical question in the world, right? For Christians and for everybody. Why is there evil? Okay, why a choice? Okay, why did they get this to begin with? Why not just not even give them it? Like, don't give them the dumb choice. Yeah. Ooh, nice one. Okay, I can answer all of these questions. This is exciting to me. Okay. Like I literally can. It's not going to be the way you like, but I can answer all of them. And it'll be better. It'll be more satisfying when I'm done, I think, if you trust me. Okay, yeah. Okay. Okay. What? Yeah, that's okay. It's not a rib. So we'll just get rid of that myth right from the beginning. It's not, I mean, that's what it says. So it says in your text, it's not a rib. Just go ahead and kill that right now. All of you think men only have one less rib and it all comes to that. Okay, first of all, it's not scientific at all. But second of all, it's not a rib. It's never translated as rib except for in this one place because they don't know what to do with it. I can tell you what to do with it, but we'll get there later. You have to come back, don't you? We can't answer all of these questions right today. All right, any other questions? Okay, these are the best questions ever because you didn't ask me any questions that I didn't prepare and think through. So that's always nice. All right, except for the question that Joe asked a minute ago, which I didn't think through. Darn it. All right. Okay, so here we go. So Abraham, and Abdiel are coming, right? Remember the little kids that are asking the questions, and somebody needs to write a story to tell them these things, and they're trying to figure out, the first creation story, and now we have the second creation story. So suppose they ask the question to Dad or to Pastor Jace today, like here they come into the door right now, and they say, why are we here in the middle of this crummy land? What happened? Why aren't we with God in the land that God gave us? Like, what in the world happened here, right? Because they're in exile and they're not happy with where they're at. Maybe they're asking this question. I have no idea. Okay, so here's if I were telling the story. Here's how I would tell the story. Many years ago, we lived in a land and everything was well, and we knew that we were called only to worship God. That was the rules, and we weren't to listen to any false prophets, any false whispers in our ears. Not to do that. We were just supposed to focus on Yahweh and ourselves and our relationship together. And we understood that that was the deal, that we weren't supposed to worship anything else, no sun or moon or any of these things, and that we must ignore all the seductions out there that come with empire, right? You Americans, we know what we're talking about when we talk about empire, right? Right? All the seductions that come in there. We're not supposed to do all those things. We're supposed to worship only God. And we knew that if we followed him, it would make us more and more wise. And we in turn would show the world, we'd shine Jesus's light. Okay, those of you in VBS, right? Right? We would glorify God. We're going to talk about today. Doxa, right? Praise God from whom? That's the doxa, right? The doxology. Doxa means glory. This is where we glorify God. See, you're learning Greek now, not just Hebrew. Okay, so at least that was the plan. So here they come in, these kids, and I'm saying, okay, gather close. I'm going to tell you how this story exactly works. So Israel, here we are, we're in Israel. We were holy, so that is set apart. We were happy, and God built a temple in the middle of land, right? This beautiful temple, and we loved it, and God was dwelling in our midst, and he gave us a king, right? You remember the king? It was fantastic, and this king was supposed to be a picture, an icon. Remember that from last week? An icon, a tselem. He was made in the likeness. He was representative of, and so he made us this king, and like every king who was made, David and Solomon and Rehoboam and Jeroboam, all these kings, Ahab, they were supposed to represent me, and they had choices to make. And when the prophets of Baal started coming around during like Elijah, Elisha time, all that started happening, and we started worshiping. We started worshiping these other gods along with Yahweh, and things got really bad. And the king who was the king at that time knew that he shouldn't listen, but it was just so hard. He was so seductive. And so he didn't yield to Yahweh because he said, I'm a man, I'm in control, right? I've lifted myself up above the heavens. Remember that from Nebuchadnezzar, right? This pride issue, the king, that's what happens to all the kings all the time. But I'm a man, I'll do this. I'm going to listen to the prophets. And as he listens to the prophets, his world gets bigger, but his representing of God and his yielding to God gets smaller and smaller, and it gets really bad, so bad that God says that's enough, and he removed his people from his presence. That's how we got here. And so, God no longer walks back and forth with us in the land, and he's now guarded by this quickly moving chariot with cherubim, and he only comes back into our lives sporadically here and there. It's like we haven't heard from God in forever because we're not where he is. He's like in another land. He's not here with us. So here we are. That's why we're in exile, Abdiel and Abraham. Okay, that's a story. You know that story. That's the biblical story, more or less. I've given it to you kind of quickly, but that's kind of what happened, right? So here is the way that Abdiel's parents, Abraham, Yaakov, Yitzhak, right? These little kids who were there, Miriam, they're there, and God is, I'm sorry, not God, and Dad is now standing before them. He's going to tell the story differently. Okay, here's how he's going to tell the story. He's going to start off like this. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created. You know that verse? It's chapter 2, verse 4 in your Bible. Okay, he's going to tell this story. This is the account. Toledot is how it begins in the Hebrew, Toledot, which is really interesting. It means this is the account of, or these are the genealogies of. In fact, the word Toledot is going to show up 10 different times in the Torah. It's the organizing structure of the book, these Toledots, right? So this is the account of all of Noah's children. This is the account of Abraham. This is the account of Isaac. This is the account of Jacob and his children. This is the account of Egypt, right? It's this Toledot. So it's all starting right here. This is how Dad is telling them this story. Okay? This is the account of the heavens and the earth and how they were created. And then he's going to talk about this land that has without trees and shrubs because none of them have sprouted yet, and there was nobody to take care of them. And then he breathes life into man. This is verse 7. Chapter 2, verse 7, in case you're reading your actual Bible in front of you, not just trusting some guy up front who took Hebrew classes, but might be lying to you. Okay, you're checking this all out, Bereans, right? You're looking at it, chapter 2, verse 7. And there were lots of trees, and one of these trees was life, and one of these trees was forbidden wisdom, knowledge of good and evil, the first one up there, right? These two different trees, and a river flows out from the garden. Rivers, number 5, and it waters all of Israel, and the land had gold and wonderful stones, and man worked and guarded this garden, that's Hebrew, which is really important actually, by the way, and was not allowed to eat from this tree of knowledge of good and evil, or good and bad. And God realizes that in order for mankind to flourish, they need to procreate, they need to fill the world with his type of people, his followers, and he gives Adam a wife from his, we'll just call it rib for fun right now, right? Which is what everybody knows it as. And they're naked and they're not ashamed, and life is rocking. Life is good. Everything is really good, but not for long, because then this little creature comes in, this Arum, this Nahash, who is Arum, this serpent who is very wise. Arum comes in and convinces them to do exactly what God told them not to do. Don't listen to God. That's not the best plan. If you do, because what's going to happen is your eyes are going to be open, and they don't listen to God. They choose their own wisdom, and their eyes are open, and they're ashamed. They realize that they're naked, and God comes to them in judgment and removes them from his presence, banishes them to this whole other land, and the presence of God is now guarded by cherubim. They can't get back into Eden, and no one has since then, which is the question, where is Eden? Right? No one's been able to get back to it. Actually, I'm going to argue that we've all been able to get back to it. But that's another thing. All right, so that's the story. So the story, if you're especially astute as I told this, you might see that because of Israel's creation, failure, and exile, that maybe this story of Israel's creation, failure, and exile looks very similar to this story of Adam's creation, failure, and exile. That those stories might actually be, the point of them is that they're the same story. That the story that I told Abdiel and Abraham and Yitzhak and all those little kids that are asking me that question, and you guys, is the same story that Dad would tell them in his time, and he would tell them from Genesis chapter 2 and 3. But Genesis 2 and 3 isn't about that. Genesis 2 and 3 is about the creation of a man, a perfect man who fails and messes up all of history. And now we're all sinners, right? Original sin comes from this, all that stuff. I'm saying, I'm not sure that's what the story is telling you. I'm not saying that that's wrong information, that the world gets messed up and that it gets messed up forever and ever. I'm just not sure that Genesis 2 is designed to give you that particular story. And I think if you give me 3 weeks or so, I can persuade you of that, and it will make the rest of the Bible come alive in new ways. And that'll take the rest of your life, right, to make the rest of the Bible, because all these things will start to pop. You'll be like, oh my goodness, that's why this whole section, which I just pretended didn't exist, is there. That's why election that Romans talks about this Calvinism thing. I get it. That's why Revelation has these dragons and ideas here, an empire. I get it. All these things are created in order, like the rest of the story. You get it. The rest of the story is there. And this is the intro to tell you why the rest of the story is coming, why it's all there. And it makes the gospel itself come alive. So if the gospel has gotten boring, shame on you. But if it's gotten boring, right, hopefully I can enliven it. Like there's something that God is doing that makes this, I don't know, like when I first knew the gospel, it was blow me out of the water, just so beautiful. And as I started seeing how it all connected, how God is using all of Scripture and all of the history of redemption to do something, and all these pieces started connecting together, the gospel narrative becomes so much more beautiful, so much more robust, which I didn't think was possible. Jesus saved me from my sins. How awesome is that? But it's so much more as you see it across this whole story. All right, so let's go ahead and look at Genesis 2. I got like 20 minutes, and I got next week and the week after that too. All right, any questions so far? All I've done is introduced it. You got 1,000 questions, right? Yeah. Yes, protology and eschatology are connected. Yes, the beginning and the end are connected. The end is not the beginning. Israelites do not think in a circle. This is not the Wheel of Time series on your Netflix thing, right? That's not what's going on here, okay? There is a linear movement going on. There's a beginning and an end, but the connections, the allusions back to the beginning are so beautiful, right? Because you get to the end, you're going to see these. It's not that there's a tree of life, but trees of life are planted, or a tree of life is planted on both sides of the river. And the leaves of the nations are the leaves are for the healing of the, all these things that are going to connect back to this beginning thing that was all about Israel's history and how Israel has failed to become what Israel was supposed to be, which is the problem. Remember, that's why the New Testament's written. Israel has failed to be who they were supposed to be. So who has to come? An Israel of one. His name is Jesus. That's the whole point. And Genesis is going to explain that story. Genesis 2 is going to say, this is why it happened. It happened because you made bad choices. Like I would have showed you in Star Wars, but you wouldn't let me by your mean looks. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at this. You got your Bibles open. Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. To start us off, this is the account of the heavens and the earth, Toledot, right? It's the account of the heavens and the earth and the way that they were created. No matter how you read this, I think you're going to be forced to agree that this is a strange beginning after we've just done the 6 and 7, right? We've created the world, and now he's like, now this is the account of the creation of the world. You're like, well, what did I just read? Like, I just read about a creation of the world. Is this a second creation of the world story? By the way, most scholars say that's exactly what's happening here. These are two separate creation stories that existed and were brought together by a redactor, an editor has brought them together. Now, either this redactor is really dumb, that he didn't know this. He's like, oh, crud, I didn't see that. Which I don't think is the case, especially since I think the Holy Spirit had a lot to do with this redaction, this editing. Or he's perfectly fine with two creation stories going side by side, because he wants you to see these two different traditions and how both of these stories tell different stories, but the same story, right? Even though they're different traditions. So we're going to have some problems, but that's okay as we get in this. Verse 4 is starting over again, and everyone's noticed it. And Genesis 1 is going to have this weird order to it. Remember the way we ordered it, right? As on day, let's see, 1, 2, 3. On day 3, vegetation begins to come up, right? But on day 6, mankind comes. So day 3, 3 days before mankind comes. But this story, look at this in verse 4. When the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, and no shrub of the field had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant of the field had yet sprung up. Okay, so that's the main line. This is what's happened. Now we got this parentheses, this comma section. For the Lord God had not set rain on the earth, and there was no man to work the ground, but streams came up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground. Just trying to explain how there was water on the world, but no plants had come up yet. So if you follow it, and no shrub of the field, this is verse 5, no shrub of the field had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant of the field had yet sprung up. Verse 7, the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Okay, so no plants and then God makes man. So you're going to notice, and everyone has noticed this. This is nothing weird. So if you're looking at this, you're like, I don't see it. Just trust me, there are no scholars who don't see this. You just need to look more carefully. But it's a different order than Genesis 1, right? In Genesis 1, mankind's created second, and all the shrubbery is created first. And in Genesis 2, they're the other way around. And no scholars are worried about this. Okay, well, maybe some people are, I don't know, but I haven't met any of them, right? Because they know that's not how you're supposed to read the Bible, right? You're not supposed to read the Bible as if every single literal detail has to be this way. No, it's literature. It's the way literature works. This whole framework thing, first day, second day, third day, right? That's poetry. It's beautiful. If you don't see Genesis 1 as poetry, then you're reading the wrong text probably, right? Because it even looks, you know how poetry, you figure out poetry, right? More white space on the page. That's how you know if there's poetry. And most of Genesis 1 is going to have a lot of white space, right? And this happened, and there was evening and there was morning, day 1. And this happened, evening, morning, day 2. That's poetic. There's a flow to it. It's this beautiful thing that's going on. It's not all poetry. It's also prose. There are all the normal verbs that happen in prose. So it's prosaic poetry. It's poetic prose. Okay, it's this beautiful mix. And everybody's seeing that in Genesis 1, it's supposed to be done that way. So as long as you're not taking this like, okay, well, God wrote it and he just made a mistake in chapter 1 and chapter 2. No, God's well aware of this. He's okay with it. You can be okay with it. Okay, because he wasn't trying to give you that. He wasn't trying to say, okay, I need you to you need to make sure you understand the taxonomy of animals in this. So here's the way it all works. He's not doing that. He's not trying to give you science lessons about how things are made and when they're made. It's this, God's the creator, not Baal, not Tiamat, not Marduk, not whoever else. Right? That's what's trying to get across. Okay, so that little problem isn't that big of a problem. So anyway, now you can answer this problem if you need to by just saying that Genesis 2 is a specification of Genesis 1, right? Genesis 1 is the big picture. And then now he's going to say, okay, now let's take day 6 and let's blow this up and go bigger. Okay, which is what a lot of people have been told. Actually, I'm fine with that. That's okay. I still think that there's a different feel between Genesis 2 and Genesis 1. I think most of you, I'm seeing some nods, most of you would, like, you're with me, right? In Genesis 1, God is this transcendent God. Let there be light. He's this big God who's moving things. He's conquering tohu vabohu, chaos, right? The darkness, shooting light into it so we can see. That's what the sermon's coming up to, shooting light into it so we can see. Okay, that's Genesis 1. Genesis 2, God's like hanging out with man. They're walking back and forth. They're having a conversation. What's up? Hey, man, hey, good. You got a good day? We want to play some kickball? Yeah. I don't know if they play kickball, but right? They're just having, it's this casual conversation. Yeah. That's right. Yep. So Elohim is the creator God, or just a generic God, often seen as the creator God. Okay, just God. That's just a title, right? And Yahweh is the name of God. All right. Now remember, we don't actually learn the name of God till Exodus 3 and Exodus 6 in some sense. But remember, this is being written way after we know the name of things. So like they didn't know it during this taking place, but they knew it when they were writing, which took place hundreds, maybe thousands of years later. Okay, let's see here. Transcendent, immanent, I talked about all that. All right, so anyway, there's two different kinds of stories here. Definitely two different kinds of story, very similar, but with distinctions that the author either totally missed or I think, like I said, I think he's purposefully doing all these things. So he's purposely shifted the focus of the story from a large creation of cosmic proportions to now a creation of what I would say is a creation of Israel story. Okay, so he's creating big, but even that first chapter, I think, is a creation of the temple story, a creation of his people story. But now we're really going to get into this. Okay, so, and I know that that big picture thing, some of you are just like, all right, I'm not going to ask questions about that because I know he's going to get into it, but I'm completely unnerved right now. Right? This destroys all of my understanding of Genesis, but I've been listening to Jace long enough. I'm not just going to stand up and walk out right now, but I really want to. Okay, just go with me. And if you disagree with me, awesome. Okay. I loved when I was a professor. I love my I don't ever want someone to say, your students look and sound just like you. No, think for yourself. That's okay with me. We can disagree and still keep going to church together and love each other like crazy. Okay, that should be count for lots of things, not just for this. All right. So, and I don't want you to throw out your old way of thinking. This is not what I'm trying to get to. I do not want you to say, okay, so Genesis 2 is not about Adam and Eve being created like a literal group, but literal two people that are being created at the beginning. Okay. I want to save that question till the end, or maybe push it all the way as to whether they are. Some of you here think these are literal 100% real people that all started there. You've read all of your genome theory, right? You've done all that and you've seen it all go back to two people. And so you're happy with that kind of understanding. It's Adam and Eve. And some of you are like, yeah, there's no way that happened. You've read the genome theory and you know it doesn't go back to two. You've both read it completely different ways. You've interpreted it, right? You've done all these things. Okay. I'm saying you can hold to either one of those views and you can still incorporate what I'm saying here. Okay, that is, if you even have a literal Adam and literal Eve, they're hanging out naked in an actual garden, okay, that this story is still about something bigger than itself. So if it happened, okay, and you need it to have happened, it can still be where I'm taking you. Okay, you can hold on to those things, that's fine. Okay, I'm not ever going to tell you what I think, because actually, I just don't think the story is trying to get you to see an original human pair. That doesn't mean there's not original human pair. The way the story has been edited to its final way, it's teaching you something different. It's heading you in a different direction. Okay, does that make you feel a little more comfortable? So you don't need to get rid of your Adam and Eve. They're 100%, they're here. But now you can still listen and see where it's going. Okay, and we're not going to read every single verse in all these chapters, but I want to show you this at least as an intro for 7 or 8 minutes. And then we'll review it next week because we'll go in more detail. Verse 8. Keep your Bibles open. You need to be looking at this or something. Now scroll to it. Now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. Okay, so we're going to shrink right down to this verse. We're going to go slow for a second. Now Yahweh Elohim. Okay, both names here are given. That's Lord God in yours. Lord's all capital letters. God had planted a garden. Okay, so he put this garden here in the east in Eden. Okay, so this is probably kind of important. Okay, so in the east in Eden, let's see, where's east? The east is over here, right? So this is east, this is west. Okay, so he's planting a garden in Eden. So here's Eden, and here is the garden. So the garden is a smaller place out in Eden, but a smaller place within Eden. And then we're going to find out later on that there's a tree in the center of the garden. See, I messed it all up. The tree has to be here. Okay, it has to be in the center of the garden. Okay, and then there's land outside of that. Okay, that's going to be important because what I'm going to try and convince you of is that this place that they're going into, that he's planting, that he's doing, is actually a temple that he's making. And you know, we always do it like this, right? With the opening to the east. And you know that there's a holier place within a holy place and a holy place with the rest of the land. Okay, that's intentional what they're trying to do here, what this author is trying to do. He's trying to give you this. Okay, this is going to show up, by the way, in the Ark story. Not the Ark of the Covenant, but the Teva, the Ark, the floating Ark. It's going to show up in the mountain story. In fact, that's why God is called El Shaddai, the God of the mountain. I know, mighty God, whatever. It's God of the mountain, right? Okay, it's these different barriers that you have to reach to get to God, these things that you have to go into. Okay, all this is intentional. Genesis is going to tell you the bigger story all the way around. So the temple faces east. That's what I wanted to say to you. Just as the garden faces east. Okay, why is that? It's the way it has to work. Okay, the reason the garden faces east is because the temple faces east. Because what he's trying to do is tell you that the garden is a temple. And the Lord God made all, if you need references on all that, I'm not going to give you references on every one. I don't think you care. If you want them, I have them. Exodus 15, Ezekiel 40, Ezekiel 43, Ezekiel 28. You can read all that stuff and see that the temple faces east. And we know it faces east because we're reading it right here in Genesis. And the Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. Just FYI, when God created the temple, on the walls were engraven pomegranates, trees, almonds. Okay, you're supposed to walk into the temple and feel like you're going into a garden. If you missed that, read the creation of the temple and the tabernacle stories. Okay, that's how you're supposed to feel when you go into these, because this is sacred space. The Garden of Eden is where God dwells with mankind. That's really important. That's why we're heading back there in Revelation. That's why the New Jerusalem is going to come out of heaven to earth, because the whole idea has been that God will once again dwell with man, and that becomes sacred space. By the way, just a little aside, little input in here. You are currently sacred space, right? Because the God of the universe that created everything comes and dwells in you. And you go out, and wherever you go, sacred space goes. So you're actually creating sacred space across the world. So this afternoon, if you're at the Loop or you're at Dario or wherever you're at, you're creating sacred space there. And if you're not, you're missing your purpose. If you're just going and hanging out and eating, you're missing it. Everything is about the glorification of God and shining the light. I'm just going to nail that every single time. Yeah, we got a VBS. Okay. The Lord God made all kinds of trees to grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. This is going to be a problem later. Pleasing to the eye. The best thing that we could hope for, right? I mean, this is great. They're pleasing to the eye. They're also going to be delicious, right? But pleasing to the eye. Things are often pleasing to our eyes, aren't they? Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Did you guys learn that? Be careful, little eye, right? Because they seduce us. Be careful, little ear, what you hear, because serpents come and they whisper things in our ears. That's what's coming. You already know the story. So the temple's covered with trees, almonds, pomegranates, designed to look like a garden. In the middle, verse 9, in the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yeah, two trees in the middle of the garden. They're in the middle of the garden. So they're there. They're together. They're somewhere near each other in the middle of the garden. You don't have to figure out, are they separate trees or they're different trees, but they're in the same place. They're all in the center of the garden. By the way, here there are also two different kinds of trees in the same place. Okay, you can't tell what that is, can you? I don't know why I'm even drawing it. It looks really good to me from here. You're just like, what is this? This is a candelabra, right? A tree. By the way, on the candelabra, it has tree branches. It's supposed to be branches, and you can even see the different the blooms and stuff like that on an actual candelabra. Okay, that's in there. And the other tree is made out of wood, right? And has on it an angel. I don't know what an angel looks like. It's a cherubim, right? That protects the place of God. Okay, it protects the Torah, which is that which makes man wise, and the candelabra, which brings light to all men. Okay, light to the nations. Two trees in the holy place in the garden. Okay, this is all intentional. The author is playing. He's very well aware of what's in there, and he wants you to see this is the presence of God. This is where the Shekinah glory dwells, right? Right here. In fact, right here, there's smoke, right, that keeps you out, and a big, huge curtain, and cherubim are drawn into the curtains there, are sewn into the curtains. And there's cherubim on top of the ark, which if you were good Indiana Jones fans, you're not allowed to look into or to touch, right? Okay, it's really look into, but I mean, really touch, but whatever. There's going to be some different ways of understanding that in Second Temple literature. It was also not just touch, but it was look into. So look at, can you see? Be careful what you see. All right. By the way, Eve is also going to say, oh, we're not allowed to eat of that or even touch it. And then a lot of you are learning, oh, God didn't say you couldn't touch it. Actually, maybe he did. Right? Maybe that's the whole point, is that he said, don't touch it. And you're supposed to make that connection here. Right? Because you're not allowed to touch the Ark of the Covenant. Remember, it was a touches it and dies. That story always worries you. It shouldn't worry you, but we got to talk about that some other time. Okay. It's a whole other thing. I got 1 minute maybe. Yeah, forget it. Okay, I can't get into this. Any questions in the last minute? A million? I don't know why that tradition started. Maybe somebody here is smarter than me, but why east? Why does everything have to go east? I mean, I know you're supposed to go west, young man, right? To the Mediterranean, not to Babylon, but yeah. Yeah, maybe so. Maybe it's that simple. Yeah, it's how do rituals start and things like that. I'm not 100% sure. That's something I should know, probably. All of them were, yeah. Yeah. At least in that world. I don't know if all temples across the world are. I don't know if Aztec ones are or Chinese ones are. I don't know. But I know Mesopotamia is. So that's the world they knew. Yeah. So maybe it started with sun, Zoroastrianism, something like that. I'm not sure. Okay. Woo! Let's spend 30 minutes hanging out together, eating food, drinking coffee to keep you awake for the next part, where we go to worship God. Worship is in the worship center this week. Yes. So not in the sanctuary.